We're talking politics today, and there's three frontrunners in the Democratic primary in Pennsylvania's 3rd Congressional District race. In this really important district, though, how are candidates distinguishing themselves from one another? Lauren Vidas, our political contributor, is here to talk about how the race is shaping up. It's Thursday, April 2nd. I'm Trenae Nuri, and we're talking politics. Lauren, thanks for being back. When we last spoke, maybe like 2 months ago, there was a long list of people who wanted to fill this open seat in the 3rd Congressional District. Remind us all why this race is so important for Philadelphians.
Well, this race is incredibly important for Philadelphia because I think as we've seen over the last couple of months with cuts to funding for Medicaid, for the Affordable Care Act, for infrastructure projects, a lot of money that flows into Philadelphia flows from Washington, D.C. So having a strong vocal representative that can advocate for Pennsylvanians' rights and help bring resources back to the Commonwealth is incredibly important for every Philadelphian.
So now that there are 6 candidates, are you surprised by anyone who actually dropped out of the race?
No, I think when you look at the folks that did drop out, it has to do with resources, especially as we move into the month or two before the primary where people are really starting to lock and focus and you have to start spending money on television ads and mail. If you don't have the resources to do that, it's really an uphill battle to win. And so I think the folks that did drop out, it was not because they lost their passion for the seat or that they lost their passion for serving Philadelphia. They just were realistic about the financial challenges that they had to overcome.
I want to talk a little bit more about commercials and those mailers in just a second. But my thoughts now are that if you've been paying attention to this race and the candidates, they've been actively participating in various forums. I went to one that the Philadelphia Citizen hosted at the Filler Club this week. Rabb, Dr. Stanford, and Street, who are the front runners. And I got to learn a little bit about the candidates. I got to hear about the candidates' biggest donors. Rabb shouted out his mommy. I learned that many of Street's staff have been impacted by gun violence and how that informs their work. And I had a chance to hear from Dr. Stanford, who doesn't have experience in office. And she, said, I don't know everything about everything, but her approach would be to reach out to experts. So it was really interesting to hear about their careers, their families, connections to the community, and their passions for wanting this position and wanting to fight for Philadelphians and Pennsylvanians in Congress. But in the coming weeks, what are voters going to hear, and how can voters actually engage with these candidates?
Yeah, so I think the 3 names you mentioned are clear frontrunners. There's 6 candidates that are vying for the position, but only 3 of them really have the resources to realistically compete to get their names out to voters.
They have the money, basically.
They have the money, and money equals name recognition, right? You have to tell people who you are 6 or 7 times before they even recognize your name, let alone choose to vote or to support you. So it's an important aspect of any campaign, and I think where we're really kind of seeing the candidates distinguish themselves, a lot of I would say probably 95% of the policies they're going to agree on, right? They're Democrats running in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of alignment in the policies. I think what we're seeing is a distinguishment between both backgrounds in terms of how people kind of got on the path to this public service, as well as just track records, people really trying to run on their track record. So for instance, you have Dr. Ayla Stanford, who is a physician, founder of the Black Doctors Consortium, She's really running as hey, I am not a politician. I am a medical professional that was here and stepped up in COVID when our government was failing us. And I understand how important Medicare for all is. And I'm going to go to Washington and fight for those because I know the challenges faced by every normal day Philadelphians because I've been their doctor for 20 years. You have Senator Sharif Street, who I think is really running on sort of his role within the party as an operator that can get things done. I think Pennsylvanians and Americans in general are frustrated with what is seen as almost a do-nothing Congress, right? Whether it's prices going up, it's, whether this act of war needed congressional approval, people are sick of seeing their Congress members just kind of stand around with their hands in their pockets. So I think Senator Street is saying like, hey, send me to DC. I know how I've been in politics my entire life. I know how to work this and get things done. And then you have Chris Rabb, who's a current state rep who announced that he wouldn't be seeking reelection for his state rep seat, who's really trying to position himself as the true progressive in the race and sees on those sort of the progressive movement that has seen some success recently in Philadelphia in terms of getting folks elected, whether it's the Working Families Party or District Attorney Larry Krasner. And so I think he's trying to position himself and say, hey, if you have progressive ideals, I'm the only candidate that you should be considering.
All right, we've got more political chatter after the break. Okay, Lauren, you mentioned that money is super important in this race because you can get things done. But talk to me about endorsements. Rabb, that you mentioned, he's got a coalition of like leftist organizations, the Working Families Party, Democratic Socialists of America, Reclaim Philadelphia. On the other side, Dr. Stanford has the endorsement of Dwight Evans, the current sitting congressional member in this seat, 314 Action, even her former rival, Dr. David Oxman. Street has had a number of labor groups supporting and endorsing him and the Philadelphia Democratic Committee. So help me to understand this. How important are these endorsements for these candidates?
Yeah, I think endorsements serve sort of three basic purposes. The first thing that they really help with is validity, right? This idea that the incumbent endorsing Dr. Stanford is saying like, hey, the incumbent thinks that she could do a good job down in DC. So that's an important validator for folks. The second piece is that it does help raise money, right? All of these groups will likely be making donations and providing financial support to the candidates that they're endorsing. And lastly, and it depends on the organization, but typically endorsements come with some boots on the ground on election day and for GOTV or get out the vote. So that's really the sort of the three main reasons why endorsements are important. They can also serve as like a shortcut for voters. So if you believe strongly in labor unions and you're a big supporter of the trades, seeing the candidate that they endorse is kind of a shortcut for you. It's like, okay, I know that person is good on labor issues. I can vote for them.
So I looked at the Federal Election Commission website to see where the money is flowing, how these candidates are actually fundraising, how it's stacking up. And by the measures last tracked in December of 2025, Street has a significant amount of money for his campaign. And Rabb and Dr. Stanford are kind of closely in the same bracket, I would say. Is fundraising, like you mentioned, so important that the person that has the most money usually wins, or is it a toss up?
Yeah, what I would say is like that's a very early report, right? That's the year end, and everybody does everything they can to make sure that report looks as that number is as big as possible. And folks really haven't started spending down their resources just yet because you're so far out from the election at that stage. I think the April quarterly report will really be the one to focus on, and that will come out in the next couple of weeks. And that will tell you it's not just about the money raised, but it's also about the cash on hand and how it's being spent.
Some candidates have a lot of cash of their personal cash on hand to spend.
Yeah, a lot of candidates have been doing loans for themselves. I think the other thing that you're not seeing in the reports because of Citizens United is the idea of independent expenditures. The fact that you can have super PACs come in, and as long as they don't coordinate with the candidate, they can spend as much money as they want. And that's what we're seeing with Dr. Stanford's ads being on TV already. The
Yeah.
314 Action Committee is paying for those ads. So that's millions of dollars that are coming in that aren't going to flow through a candidate account. So it's really important to not just look at that number, but looking at things like the burn rate and what other independent expenditures are coming out of the woodwork to support candidates. That gives you kind of a clearer picture of the resources going into each nominee.
You said the burn rate. That means like how much they're spending.
Yeah, how much they're spending and where they're spending it on. So, for instance, are they dumping all of their money into mail and television, or are they paying? Is all their money going to consultants? Right. So
Mhm.
it's just sort of something to track, and it gives you kind of a more complete picture of how that race is being run.
Now, if you're not really into politics, over the last few years, we couldn't get rid of it off of our TVs. And I've seen commercials for Dr. Stanford, like you mentioned, from time to time, and I'm watching my crime shows. And they've been positive for her, not disparaging other candidates. So, how important is capturing the eyes of voters via broadcast television nowadays in an age of like endless TikToks, Instagram reels? Is that still effective political campaigning? Because when I think about it, I haven't gotten any like mail yet about this campaign. I've been paying attention because it's my job, but I haven't seen as many as like previous elections, both like local and like presidential campaigns.
Yeah, I mean it's still early for mail to start. Typically, you'll see mail will really start being generated about a month out before the election, and they'll do them in batches, right? So you're not just going to get a single mailer. A single mailer's piece is not going to be effective. You'll probably get your mailbox will be overflowing by the time we hit the primary, and you'll be wondering why you thought you weren't getting any mail before. Um,
Okay.
Regarding the television question, yeah, television is still important, right? Because you have when you look at who still watches broadcast television and cable television, it tends to be older folks who are not on scrolling TikTok all day, and those folks vote, right? So it is still important, but it is also wildly expensive. Philadelphia, I believe, is the third most expensive media market in the nation. So going up on TV costs a tremendous amount of resources, not only to pay for the ads, but to cut the ads, film them, things like that. So while TV is important, it's not necessarily a deal breaker, especially I think you've seen this with some candidates who have been seen as dark horse candidates, but they've made innovative use of social media. They've figured out how to go viral. And that type of organic outreach is really, really important for candidates who might not have the financial resources to fund a television ad campaign.
We've talked about the forums, we've talked about using broadcast. And this week, I saw that WHYY was starting to promote a debate, an actual debate later in the month with Rabb and Dr. Stanford and Street. They're expected to discuss, their policy ideas and a lot more. What would voters get that's different in a debate versus all the forums that we've seen candidates at, and even the No Kings rallies we've seen scattered around the city? What different sound bites or perspectives can voters get in a debate format?
Yeah, I think the reason debate's important is because there's a moderator that's not just there to ask the same sort of softball question to each of the candidates, like, what's your cheesesteak order type questions. Debates typically allow moderators leeway to kind of not attack, but to highlight maybe criticisms or weak points in candidates that you wouldn't necessarily get in kind of a friendly forum. Debates also allow the candidates, typically in forums, they're not supposed to talk to each other, they're supposed to talk to the audience. In a debate, you are talking to the other candidates, you are arguing with them, you are calling out the candidates or the things that you disagree with, or bringing up past mistakes, or criticizing sound bites they may have given in the past. So it's a lot much more of an adversarial process, and I think a lot of the forums and that we've seen in the last couple of months.
Interesting. Okay, so do you think this is the final ballot with these top frontrunners, or can someone else drop out at this point?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if you see a couple more names withdraw from the ballot, but we could have all six of these folks on. As I said, I think it's really important that, we have three front runners, just because the nature of American politics and campaign finance, you need resources. However, I would strongly encourage all the listeners to learn more about each of the candidates. They may find a candidate that they've never heard of that they connect with. So it's really important not just to rely on TV and mail and things like that, and to do your research into who is on the ballot in advance of the election, because you may find a candidate that you fall in love with and really appreciate, and they don't have the resources to connect with you.
All right, Lauren Vidas, thank you so much, as always, for being here on CityCast Philly today.
Always happy to be on. Thank you, Trenae.
And for more on what will be on your May primary ballot, check out today's newsletter for a breakdown of the ballot questions. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about politics and what's happening in the 3rd Congressional District race, share this with a friend. Also, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with the Friday News Roundup. Talk to you then. Bye.